Hello, I'm Wendy Brickman of Brickman Marketing here on the Brickman Banner Show, and I'm thrilled to have Dick Guttman. He's the author of Starflacker, Starflacker, a 600-page fascinating book that everyone should read. And he's also the founder of Guttman Associates, a top celebrity PR firm in Beverly Hills. Welcome, Dick.
Okay, well, thank you so much for calling people's attention to it.
Yeah, all my friends. I've got a lot of friends from the film industry too, and my friend's a screenwriter, and they love it.
This conversation, it's really interesting because there's a story about doing interviews. Peter Ustinov was a client and a very close friend.
Yeah.
At the time I was doing about 7 interviews in a row for a new book that he had out, and I don't know why I apologized because it was selling his book, not my book. And I said, Peter, I'm sorry, all these interviews. He says, no, quite the contrary. I enjoy interviews. I said, why? He says, because I learn I find out what I think. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, they're going to ask me questions that I never considered before. Obviously, I have a latent opinion. I'll discover what that is.
At the moment.
Except that as it worked out, he gave the same interview 7 times.
He's a great actor. We were watching something.
Give a performance.
Yeah, Peter Ustinov is incredible, and we were watching something where he was. It's fun. The one thing about this pandemic is it gives you more time to watch great films.
Yeah, we wind up now. All we watch are cable news and Turner Classic Movies.
Right. And you could also stream some. I'm going to stream the conversation with Gene Hackman because I can't remember if I saw it, but my husband did, and he wants to see it as well. So Gene Hackman was an incredible actor who I guess retired from acting.
Yeah, that's terrible. I asked him why he did that, and he said, I love acting, but I hate the business. And I said, but why are you turning this down? He said, they offer me so much money, and it makes me feel guilty. And I said, well, what if they pay you half the money? You'll feel only half as guilty. He says, no, I'd be twice as angry.
He could donate it all.
I couldn't get him to go back in business.
I understand. I mean, and you understand, don't you?
No, he's a great director. I said, why direct these people? He says, I'd kill the actors. And I think he made the right decision for himself.
He does. He moved out of town, right?
They live in, they live they live in 2 vacation spots. So he's always someplace he wants to be.
So one of my next questions is, when your clients did an interview, did you always go with them? And what was your role when you could?
You almost invariably go, because there are ways that you can conduct an interview. You can introduce an idea, or sometimes it's just pouring a lot of energy into it. And usually you do it places where other people are doing it at other tables. You were at the Hollywood Brown Derby, or at the Polo Lounge, or the Bel Air Hotel, and then you see all these different press agents there. You could tell who was the press agent. They were sort of hunched forward, and the shoulders were moving like they were looking like for a good way to get to the quarterback. And but one time I did that with Horst Buchholz. I was doing an interview. There was a journalist, a columnist named Flora Bill Muir. Flora Bill Muir was in the New York Daily News and had stories in the LA Mirror. And everybody thought she was an old battle axe. She was tough. And she got her first job from one of the great gunslingers, who was the editor of the Salt Lake paper, and he sent her out to cover a public hanging, to cut the green out of her. But the green was out of her, and she was present when Legs Diamond was killed, and the way she handled that, she became a favorite of the mafia. The mafia all loved her. They would slip stories to her, and she was the only person that wrote stories, took shots at people who could shoot back.
Yeah, very scary.
So anyway, I did an interview with her with Horst, and Warren Cowan, my boss, and he knew that Horst was the biggest agent in town, really loved him, and so he thought he should be part of it. And he kept trying to direct the interview and sort of interrupted and adding things in and saying, well, what do you talk to him about? And so finally she says, Warren, I love you, but one of us is leaving the table. Who is it?
Wow.
And he said,
Right.
I
So
just
you're
can't
kind of a fly on the wall.
Yes.
Do you kick people under the table?
I don't remember ever having done that. No, I was
Good.
with Warren Count because we would watch screenings together, and when he'd fall asleep, particularly if he fell asleep while a comedian was playing his new comedy album for you, that's a bad thing. So I would, when we're watching it, I would jab Warren.
Yeah. Keep them away. Yeah, that happens.
That's
What
when
about your role at Hollywood? Tell us about Hollywood parties in the 60s, 70s era.
well, they were sort of carbon copies of each other. I mean, there were exceptions. There was one point where Queen Soraya was conducted out of the royalty of Iran, and she came here, and she was this great tragic story. This beautiful woman who was basically fired as queen, and so she was becoming a movie star. For Kurt Frames, this very famous, most of the great foreign actors had him as their agent, and he was very important to the company I was working for, Rogers and Cowan, because he handled all the great ladies, and because of him, they handled Elizabeth Taylor, Audrey Hepburn, Elke Summer, Carol Baker. Carol Baker was a gigantic star in the 60s. And so he has a party for him at his quite small house behind the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I've gone to parties where it looked like the Oscars. This was better than the Oscars. People you never saw. Danny Kaye, Fred Astaire. These are people that never ever were at a party. And there was a pickup band there. It was Anthony Newley at the piano. Sammy Davis was on the guitar. Dean Martin was singing. I don't know who he was playing, and Marlon Brando was doing the bongo drums. And he had been at some occasion.
Sounds like a movie itself.
Oh, it was incredible. But I remember it because Marlon had been at a screening of Maximilian Schul's Hamlet, and the whole cast from Young Lions was there. Was at the director Eddie Dimitri's house. And so Max says, and now this is in German, but I'm going to leave now. My friend Gisela Guttman, my wife, will translate for you. She knew Hamlet in German. She'd never heard it in English. She didn't know to be or to not to be, more kith and kin, whatever it was, all the phrases that this particular audience knew. Monty Clift. And Monty is lying at her feet, holding onto her legs, intense, watching this thing. And at a certain point, he starts to sob and sob and sob, and he's just drowning everything out. And he stood up and he says, I'm getting out of this shit house. And he runs out. And then everything sort of, the film's going on, and then she started translating. So anyway, they were at this party, and Brando is showing her, motions are down to show her how to do the bongos. And she does it, and he says, Hamlet? She said, yeah. He said, you did good.
Oh,
That was the best review I ever heard.
that was nice.
That he did that.
But otherwise, the parties were kind of redundant.
Well, that one was extraordinary.
No, not that one.
Oh, well, there were, you had the ones that are at the wealthy producers' houses. There were all kinds of parties. We had the Bel Air circuit was when people wanted the industry to see their films, they would give it to different people who had screening rooms at their house, and they would show it. And Warren Cowan was a kind of a genius. He was my guy who taught me and became kind of a partner. And the film didn't have great distinction, but he said, we're going to give it a premiere at the Bel Air circuit, and they will have a screening at each of the people whose houses was showing at would get the normal people who came to their screening, which are all people you wanted to premiere. And
good idea.
The media and we'll take them from one house to another so that they could, bump into all these different things. It was a great idea, and you had to do it with a difference. It was actually because of a party that I left Rochester Town because they were doing the opening for Blum's Furriers was the great furriers of the Belle Epoque, and they were famous because uh, Sarah Bernhardt, Gala Kirchi, and Eleanor Duse, the three greatest actresses of the epoch, all got their furs there. And so we were going to have the opening in Beverly Hills, and I said, Warren, I have an idea. We're going to have a seance. And the guest of honors will be Eleanor Duse, Gala Kirchi, and Sarah Bernhardt. He said, they're dead. I said, I know, but they may come, or they may not, but people will be there, and it'll be a lot of fun. And he said, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. And I went out and started my own company.
I think it would have been fun. Did you ever do it? No.
I probably did some version of it. But,
Did you? Let's talk about Bob Evans, because I told you we watched Chinatown 1 and 2 and Two Jakes and
he was a great personality. I mean, I handled a couple of his wives.
his wives, Ally McGraw.
Ally was a friend more, but Camilla Spar was one of them. And but Bob, I wasn't drawn to him because his nervous energy was painful to me. It was like electricity. He was never happy, I felt. And so Max Show would take me there to see a film or something. But I sort of avoided him because I felt a tremendous unhappiness.
His mentor was Charles Bluedorn, and I worked in the Bluedorn building at Paramount.
Well,
and I learned that.
Charlie Bluedorn is really the guy that made Warren Beatty a great star. He personally oversaw.
Well, let's talk about Warren Beatty and why he isn't President Beatty.
I think partly because he couldn't make up his mind. I mean, Warren is brilliant. Warner Brothers turned over Bonnie and Clyde to me, the Oscar campaign, because Jack Warner hated the movie.
Great film.
They showed it, they opened it in Indiana. It didn't do very much. Should have, because Dillinger was from this small town that should have opened it there. Anyway, Warren had to beg Jack to bring it out as a movie and to put it into Hollywood to qualify. And Jack really hated it. So Max Burkett, who was the head of a really brilliant man, the head of publicity there, but his first job was Jack Warner, keep Jack Warner happy. He gave me the film because he didn't want Max to say, Max, why are you wasting time on this thing? And so there was a great the head of distribution and of marketing were Dick Lederer and I forget the other. Anyway, Warren was 27, said, if these two guys were free, I'd start my own studio. That's who Warren Beatty was. But on the other hand, if you asked something of Warren, you prayed for either a yes or no, because the worst thing was maybe. Maybe meant that you would be frozen in time. And
maybe not.
I think it's the reason he never ran for office. You can't just say maybe as the president. But he's a very insightful guy. So in the middle of that campaign, I was looking at these quotes I had. You have quote ads, and I had like 300, all good. And so I called Martin and I said, I need to ask your permission on this. I want to do this. I want to get all 300 on a page, but I can't. So I want to do it in 6-point type. He says, what do you mean? I said, newspapers are printed in 8-point type. I want to take a 25% cut on that and much smaller type, which is difficult to read, but I will burst out in black and in bold face the names of the different publications, which are all very dignified.
Right.
And it was a long pause. I said, do I have to explain that to you again? He said, no. Is there a 4-point type?
Ah.
That's who Warren Beatty was. He understood this. He wanted to take it a step further. And we did pretty well. We got a lot of nominations.
Bonnie and Clyde? It was incredible. All of his films have really been consistently thoughtful and great acting.
Worked with a little bit with Orson Welles, although he was a friend of my wife's, and she was doing some business at the what was the Patrick Terrai restaurant. And anyway, he would have his lunch there every day. And there's some guy came to have a meeting with him with some billionaire wanted to put money in her galleries, but he came in as billionaires might, and basically in rags. It was, you know, it wasn't a proper attire for a restaurant. And Orson Welles called him over and he says, "You leave and don't come back to have lunch with that lady until you're properly dressed." And he prepared, and so he had Gisela sit down with him, and they became good friends. And the guy came
Good.
to the new suit in about 25 minutes.
He had an interesting career too. Didn't he get blackballed or Orson Welles?
Who, Orson Welles?
Was he?
He made, I mean, my
First-
first boss was,
Hearst,
yeah, William Brando first was my first boss.
Citizen Kane.
When I was a kid, when I was 15, I was writing high school sports for the for the Examiner, which was the big paper there. And one time I wrote a story, column, and it referred to President Truman, and it said President Truman did this and this, and then when I referred to me, I said Mr. Truman also did that. That was, and so the editor, sports editor, calls me over. He says, "Guttman, did you do this thing with Mr. Truman?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why did you do it?" And I said, "Well, I looked at the style book for AP, and that's what they do." He says, "Well, this is an AP. This is a Hearst publication. Publication. There's only one Mister, and that's Mr. William Randolph Hearst."
Exactly.
I almost got fired because I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he did a good job, Orson Welles, on that. What is it like to work with a client's manager and an agent and a studio, and you have your own agenda for?
Well, the first thing you have to do is make them think that your agenda is their agenda. You find out what they want, and you can make several changes, but they're not going to come up with a creative idea that's going to articulate that purpose. So, and a lot of it's making people think they're doing what they want.
Yeah, right.
Often I'll use a technique when I put an idea to somebody, and I see it doesn't really go over, and then a little bit later in the conversation, I say, "You know what? I've been thinking that thing you said about having the butler do this. I think that's a really good idea. I think you really came up with the idea." And the guy says, "Yeah, maybe that does work." I come up with them sometimes. Very often.
You know, what was interesting too was that you do advertising as well as PR, because you said you book ads.
Yeah, well, you do advertising. Well, the Academy is so different. I'm not happy. I would not go into this business right now. It doesn't have.
Let's talk about that. Why?
Well, it's all technological, a viral story
Yeah.
in Prescott, Texas. It can have more impact than the statement of a president, and you can't control it. In those days, you had three television networks. You had AP, UPI, Reuters. You had the magazines. You know, Time Magazine, People Magazine, Life and Look. You knew where your targets were, and you could work in that case, and you could very often make them come to you. Now, I don't get it. In first place, the internet bores me, and I would never be very good at this. For the last 10 years, I think my staff has done almost all the work because I come up with ideas.
It's exhausting for them.
No, for them, it's natural.
Okay. But there's, I mean, so many social media strategies.
Well, I mean, there are ways where the old ideas work. What you want to do is have an idea that does the work. I was handling The Artist, and this is going to sound terrible because I really liked working with Harvey Weinstein. I had no idea. I mean, I knew he was brutal to people, but I didn't know that the sexual things went on. It actually didn't occur to me. And but we go to meetings, and I remember there was one meeting on Philomena, and which should have won the Oscar that year, but it couldn't because 12 Years a Slave had come up with an idea that owned the Oscar, and their idea was, it's time. There's no way to get around that. And but Harvey it made him crazy because he knew it had been a movie, and we went to one meeting, and I said to Lisa Tabak, who was running the campaign, I said, this is going to be blood. And she said, why? I said, look at the secretaries. And she looked at, they were all just a Twitter with terror. But Harvey made good movies. No, he was like the throwback to the great.
Was he Manchurian Candidate?
I'm sorry?
Was it Lawrence Harvey?
No, this was Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, Harvey Weinstein.
No,
Sorry.
Harvey was actually one of my best friends. He was my first client. And
I read. I think he made great films. He just made bad decisions.
Well, he was a super epicure, and he was a wonderful actor. He was just a wonderful friend. One time he called me and he said, "What are you doing?" It was Saturday. I said, "I'm washing my dad's car." He said, "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes." I said, "Why?" He said, he said, I'm taking over. I need you to come with me to someplace. I'm doing an album." And he was doing it was a classical album. He was doing the narration. And I come there, and there's this little man there, and Larry takes me over and says, the maestro says to the little man, "This is my friend, Dick Guttman." He said, "Dick, Igor Stravinsky."
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
You there to meet Igor Stravinsky?
I don't think that's in the book, is it? That's
They have it in the book because
volume 2.
Months later, there was a delicatessen in Beverly Hills that had an upstairs room where the not important people are. So it was very crowded. So we go in the not important people, and I said, "See that little guy at the next table?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "That's Igor Stravinsky." "Oh yeah. Oh look, there's Tchaikovsky over there. Oh, and Mozart. Wolfgang. What's with that hair?"
Yeah, right.
I'm telling you, that is Igor Stravinsky. And I go over to the table loud enough they can hear. I said, "Maestro, I'm Lawrence Harvey's friend." "Oh my dear," he takes my hand, both of his, and I came back to the table. They were just astonished and just staring at him. It was like seeing Mozart.
Yeah, yeah.
Mary Harvey. And Clint one time.
Clint Eastwood?
Yeah, he was making played Misty for me. So he says, "Get your ass out to music room 8 at Universal." It's at 6 o'clock, and I go out there, and it was Errol Garner who played Misty 8 different ways in an hour. He sat there, and it just poured out of him. Whoever gets that opportunity to experience that.
Was that the scoring stage?
Was at the scoring stage, and then Mark Rydell was doing a film, and the film score was all going to be harmonica. He called me over, and for 4 hours I watched Toots Thielman do the score for a movie.
My colleague used to manage the scoring stage, so I used to sneak in, and it was amazing how they scored a film with the full orchestra sometimes.
In this case, it's one guy with one little instrument.
In that whole room?
Yeah,
soundproof room.
Bob Radnitz was making Where the Lilies Bloom. He called me, and it was Earl Scruggs doing the score. And who gets to have that kind of experience?
No, that's to me the windfall of your career. Being at really special places at special times with really talented people.
I was meant to do that job because every good thing in my life happened because of it. I was 22. I was graduated, but I was still a psych student. and I would go and do tests. I enjoyed doing psychological tests.
Oh, right. I read about this.
I took this one that sounded really interesting. I went to see the professor. I said, "What is it that this test is?" He says, "It's a pseudo-psychotic. That if you do this, you will experience psychosis in various forms." And so he said, "I think you'll come back." And so, well, it sounded interesting to me. So I go there. It was the CIA test into LSD, and it blew my mind away. It was 10 hours of horror, three suicide attempts. It was
That's
really,
terrible.
and so when I was
You
finished with
didn't take to it like a duck to water, like some of these other people.
oh, well, I worked with Ken Kesey on it because I did the publicity on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right. That's right. What did you tell him?
I'm sorry.
Did you tell him about your experience?
I did because I knew that he had done it, but he did it 3 years later where they tempered it. Wait, did I just cut us off?
No.
Well, okay, I can't see you, but that's okay.
So we're talking about Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and LSD.
Did I cut you off from?
No.
Okay, good. So I don't like to look at myself anyway, but so I knew that it had changed me terribly. I really thought I was going to fall back into the psychotic states I was in, and so I thought I don't want my parents to have a front row seat. So I stopped doing publicity at that office, and I took off to Europe to look for a job. And the job turned out to be 11 in the afternoon. Billy Wilder, Audrey Hepburn, Gary Cooper, Louis Chevalier. I mean,
In Paris?
you couldn't be on a higher plane than that.
No.
And
In Paris.
I was in Paris. I was 22 years old, and
Luck of the draw.
I was the assistant press agent, but the press agent was a very clever guy, but he was afraid of. You can be intimidated by Billy Wilder, Gary Cooper, Audrey Hepburn, and Louis Chevalier, but I never was, and so I was doing a good job there. And there was a very famous press agent named Arthur Jacobs, who went on to produce Planet of the Apes and was a very famous producer. But he was a very big press agent then, and he handled Cooper and he handled Marilyn Monroe. And he had come over to London because Marilyn was having her fits with Sir Laurence Olivier, and there was big problems. So he was there, but he took a quick trip over to Paris to see his client Gary Cooper. And he comes up to me, he says, "You know, I know about you. I may have a film for you in Madrid in March. You okay for that?" I said, "Oh, I'd love it. I don't have a next job." And he says, "Yeah, there's a favor I need. My biggest client is David O. Selznick, and his son Jeff is in Paris, and he's not very worldly, and he wants to know how to meet girls." I wasn't very worldly, but I said, "You know, if you meet me at 8 o'clock on Boulevard Saint Michel, there's a lot of girls that sit down and wait and come over and say hi." And so he gets there at 10, they're all gone.
Oh.
Up and down the street, 12 o'clock, there's nobody there. 12 o'clock, these two beautiful blondes sit down at La Biarritz. And he says, what about those two? I said, "No, look at how they're dressed. They're existentialists. They're philosophical. They're not going to let some guy sit down there." He says, so at 1 o'clock, we're still walking. They're still there. And he says, they're waiting for something. So I go over and I see this girl, and I'm madly in love with her before I walk over. But I go over, "Mademoiselle, excusez-moi, je peux m'asseoir ici." She says, "That's okay, you can speak English." I was looking for something to say, and she says, the only other people in the whole restaurant were four guys with black glasses on, and they're staring at her. And in those days, a lot of German and Swedish student girls were kidnapped for sexual trafficking. And these guys had been waiting for them to be back on the street so they could grab them. And he says, "Those four guys are trying to kidnap us." I said, "Well, we'll walk you home." And so that's how I met my wife.
How many years?
63 in 2 weeks.
That's wow. Wow. That's great. Makes life simpler when you adore your wife, right?
Yeah, she's not that she's not tough, but she's cute.
No, that's great. And that's what I was going to ask too, Oliver. You've done a lot of international PR, and even when you were based in Beverly Hills, how did you do the international PR
Well,
easily?
at Rogers and Cowan, I set up a international. I had a representative in London, a representative in Paris, and um, and I did it through that. But most of those people became sort of friends because partly because Gisela is European, and so we were handling Alain Delon and Romy Schneider, who were the great
Schneider.
romantic couple of Europe. They became friends, and Melina Mercury and Peter Ustinov, and just all the European stars had dinner at our house, and we were able. When you live in Europe, you have a sensibility that works with them. They trust you. And then when I had my own company, then we always had somebody particularly good in London, and um, and we traveled a lot because of it.
Aren't you glad you traveled a lot?
Yeah, they were wonderful things. The most interesting one was I threw the last Tehran Film Festival, and I don't know how, but I got Lauren Bacall and Otto Preminger. I read all these different stars that were over for it. And the first day I went out and there were these screenings I wanted them to go to. I go to the theater downtown Tehran, and it's okay. And I go to the door to go out the side door, and it's locked. It's not locked, locked, locked. Every door is locked. I go to the manager. Um, those doors are locked. And he says, well, you want people to get in. I said, you want people to get out if there's a fire. He said, no, I can't do that. I didn't have any stars go to any screenings. I wouldn't let them go. And a couple of years later, 400 people died in that theater.
There's too much
Time.
government.
Okay.
What are you doing now with the pandemic and your clients?
Well, there's a new reality. Your clients aren't going out either, and so they're doing Zoom is a very natural way to do interviews. They have anybody can do that. They need to have the time, and they need to. You just say you can't do it all the time, but there's the ways of doing it. There's interviews that could be done. Um, you make. I have to. It's sort of laid back now because they're not releasing movies.
Right. They're not released except through, I guess, streaming, right?
Well,
Right. There's no movie theaters. Scary. I hope they don't close.
well, AMC has already closed 500 theaters, and I have no idea where it's going to be. The pandemic and the presence of the internet, a lot of it's going to take place. I mean, it used to be you never did an interview where the person wasn't in the theater. Although one of my favorite experiences, um, Charlie Rose, he used to do a show on CBS, an interview show. So I had Jacqueline Bissett doing the interview with him. It was about taping it at about 7 o'clock at night, and CBS on Fairfax. And Charlie Rose was in DC, I think. And so we're setting up, and they're checking the camera, and they're putting, and the news was on. The evening news was on. There was a newscaster then named Terry Drinkwater, who was a neighbor of mine, so I know. And so Terry is doing some report on something, and Jackie is preparing, and then she said, "Could you let me see it on the monitor here, how I look?" And so the director says, "Okay, turn on Jackie, turn on Bissett on the monitor." And what he did was he clicked her onto the evening news, and so Terry Drinkwater is doing this, but you're watching Jackie Bissett sort of musing, looking at herself, taking it from that angle. And I
She's
saw
beautiful.
him, and I told him the story. He says, "Thanks a lot. Who wants to be in competition with Jacqueline Bissett?"
No one. No one. All right, well, we should probably wrap this up. So again, if somebody somebody should love to get your book, Starflacker, StarFlacker, you can go on the website, www.starflacker.com, and read some of these incredible stories that you've just touched on in the interview. And thank you so much for your time, Dick.
Well, I love talking about it. Just
Good,
like
well, we'll talk again.
what Peter Lenikov said, you find out what you think about things.
Thank you.